It's a very special NHL trade deadline edition of the panel presented by Sport Chek. So we bring in our analyst, Bob Stauffer and Jack Michaels. From the Oilers Radio Network, I'm Chris Westcott for Oilers TV. Guys, let's start with the most recent trade. Patrick Maroon is now a New Jersey Devil. Bob, what do we think of that trade? Did you expect maybe a little more return? What do we expect out of that one?
I think the market set its price. And, it's you take a look at Patrick Maroon last year, 27 goals, but let's not forget Edmonton sent basically dumped a contract, Martin Gurnett, as well as a fourth-round pick to acquire Patrick, and Anaheim had to eat a quarter of his salary. And a couple of years later, they get a third-round pick back. Patrick basically produced away from Connor McDavid on about a second-line, third-line level in terms of points per 60 when he played. We saw with other players like Thomas Vanek, I would suggest to you that there was not a significant return out there. The Oilers get a third-round pick. They get a prospect. It probably doesn't please every fan out there in oil country, but the market sort of dictates what you get, and that's kind of how this situation works.
And as a longtime subscriber to Sports Illustrated, the prospect coming back is interesting to me because in a hotly contested 1985 Heisman
shouldn't have
been between Bo Jackson and Chuck Long, the prospect in question, Joey Dudek, who's a junior at Boston College, he's in his third year. He's about producing at a half point per game. What we're told about him is he's shifty, elusive, and has a lot of skill, and that's something that Peter Schiraldi has talked about as wanting to come back in any deals he made near the deadline. But his dad, Joe, actually finished ninth in the Heisman Trophy voting back in 1985, was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, is in the Plymouth State Hall of Fame. I actually called a football playoff game in Plymouth, New Hampshire. First time I ever saw a moose crossing sign in my life. So it's kind of interesting how it works out. But again, there's skill coming back in the lineup, and that's the other prospect that's, kind of ready to play right now, and that's Pontus Aberg, a guy who was with Nashville for their Stanley Cup run last year, and a guy that Oscar Klefbom says you give him a little time, he's going to be a far better player than even he's expected to be right now. He's very, bullish on Pontus Aberg's prospects, and that's, of course, the return for Mark Letestu. So, again, Peter Schiraldi wanted skill and speed in return for any deal he made. He's got it.
Well, and Bob, your thoughts on Pontus Aberg, too, because obviously he's a guy's going to step in.
I mean, in terms of Dudek, I haven't seen him play. As a guy that can play in the American League, I would suggest that's he could probably play there. Can he progress to the National Hockey League without seeing him play? And without, seeing where that's way too early to judge. In terms of Aberg, it's also the price. Peter Schiraldi talked about the fact that, the Oilers are going to need some flexibility. And Aberg gives them that $650,000 cap hit through 2019. So similar to what Jujhar Khaira is making, and I think Jujhar has been a bit of a revelation this year. I think Aberg is going to be a middle six forward for Edmonton. I think he's going to play on the second or third line, and he's going to give him some quickness. To be honest with you, I don't know how he wasn't playing ahead of Scott Hartnell for me in Nashville. I don't really get that, but far be it for me to second guess the work that Peter Laviolette Nashville done. They got a good team.
Well, there's ties there with Hartnell going all the way back to Philadelphia too with Laviolette.
Right, so he's got a history with him. But the bottom line is the Oilers, and who knows why Nashville got themselves in that deal with Columbus, but the fact is it worked out the three-way. I mean, for all we know, maybe Nashville didn't want Letestu to go to another team like, say, Winnipeg. Maybe that was a byproduct of that as well. I think Edmonton's got a useful piece in Aberg. Time will tell on Dudek, and then they end up with the two number threes for both Davidson as well as for Maroon.
Right, a nice return for Davidson. Now, real quick, guys, let's go fast. Your biggest winner from the trade deadline?
Well, often these winners at the trade deadline are determined by what goes on in May and June. I mean, ultimately, Tampa's going hard for it. I mean, they've brought a significant piece in Ryan McDonough and a somewhat kind of sleeper pick in terms of a guy who could get hot in the postseason in terms of JT Miller. They're essentially the Rangers South with Ryan Callahan, Girardi, and Anton Strawman already down there. So Tampa's going for it.
Tampa Bay, for me, they did their winning last year when they got Sergachev in a deal for Jonathan Drouin. I mean, to me, that was a huge win. You know what? I'd say I can't believe what they executed with the Rangers, but at this stage, I'm starting to believe that they did it because Steve Yzerman right now he's on a hot roll. He's on a heater. And then Jack mentioned, Nashville and Winnipeg. I mean, Winnipeg gets Stastny, and then obviously Nashville picks up Hartman. So those two teams One of them's coming out. I think Nashville's got the better team, and they've also got a little bit more history. I think Winnipeg's a bit like the Oilers were last year. We'll see how Connor Hellebuck does come playoff time. But for me, those were the three teams that made the most significant impact. Boston, I know they got Rick Nash. I still think they're a ways away.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, that was an interesting trade.
Well, interesting trade deadline for the Oilers. A couple picks, a couple prospects. That's it for them this year. Bob and Jack will have the call of the game in San Jose on 6:30 CHED and the Oilers Radio Network, and I'll have you covered on EdmontonOilers.com and Oilers TV.